Boone is in the house. Kevin Boone is here. Kevin served as a missionary in Japan for many years. He's a good friend of ours. It was you want? Yeah, you can stand up. Just don't hit the ceiling. Kevin's very tall. And Kevin would always say that when he visited our church. Just picture him. What are you? 6'3"? 6'4", I'm sorry. Him in Japan, 6'4", blonde guy around the
Now it's gray.
Now it's gray? All right, well, back then you were legit blonde. Not that you're illegitimate now. That's not what I mean. They always say that when I go to the barber shop or to the hair place. Do you want to dye your hair? Does that cost money? Yes. No. This is free, okay? But Kevin, it's good to see you. Glad you're here and praying for you, and so thankful for all that you do. Thank you for your friendship. And so that's one of our partners here at De Leon Springs, Kevin Boone. We're thankful for you. Another friend of mine, friend of ours, is here, David Peters from Rapha House, and I'd like to introduce you to Dave a little bit. I have known Dave since I was a wee lad of 19 years old. Dave and I met. I've never called myself a wee lad before. Dave and I were students at Florida Christian College in Kissimmee, which is now known as Johnson University. Dave is originally from Canada, so you might have Canadian roots like Dave. You could talk to him about that. He has moved around a bit in the state of Florida. He moved to Florida in 1990, and he lived in Pensacola, Jacksonville, Daytona, Orlando, Fort Pierce, Port St. Lucie, and Miami. Did I miss any? That's close enough. You can't even, you're not sure yourself. Dave enrolled at Florida Christian College, I believe in 1991, and graduated the class of 1996 as the valedictorian of the class of 96. What most people don't know is that the salutatorian, the student who finished second in the class, is seated right behind him, my wife, Mary Gala. Much further back in those rankings would be me.
Kayla and Charlie.
Nah, not quite. I was certainly in the top 30 or 35 because our graduating class only had about 30 or 35. I had a B average. That's good. This is what a B preacher looks like. That's what an A preacher looks like, okay? That's what a valedictorian looks like, Dave Peters. Dave is married to his wonderful wife, Anastasia. They have 3 children. Jedediah is 15. He's on his way to a Christ in Youth conference as we speak. Also, his daughter, Alana, who's 13, is on her way to the Christ in Youth conference as well. Their youngest daughter is Josiah Ezekiel. He goes by the name of Zeke. He's 11 years old. Dave has been a minister, a lawyer, and he serves as general counsel for Rapha House, which tries to stop the problem, the worldwide problem of human trafficking that's going on in our world. So he's a friend of mine, and I hope by the end of today he's a friend of yours as well. Please welcome with me David Peters.
So a couple of things are worth noting in that introduction. One is the thing that Mark won't tell you is that he was actually president of our class. So somebody said something about charm, and that is surely true. The other thing is, I forget what the other thing is. It's likely just as well. Oh, that's why you're president. That's ridiculous. Anyway, on that ridiculous note, I'm going to get moving into this. On behalf of Rapha House's 200 staff and the hundreds of girls, children, and families that we get to serve, thank you for inviting me to share with you today about God's will and work in and through and for each of those girls and children, and also about God's will for His people. This is going to be a little bit of a hard intro because it's a hard thing to talk about. There will be good news, and the good news is better than the bad news. But let's get into the bad news. There are slaves in the world today. The current conservative estimates run at about 27 million in the world. It's possible that there are as many as 45 million slaves in the world today. Of those, about 1.5 to 2 million are female child slaves that are used expressly for and I will use some code language, as I often do on a Sunday morning. Those girls are used strictly for the gratification of others. Right now, as I speak, there are tens of thousands of girls suffering this. They will suffer it for hours in a row. Their bodies will sometimes be used for 12, 14, 16 hours in a row. They will ultimately die, or they will be discarded. If they are discarded, most will see little option but to try to exploit themselves as they've been exploited in times past just to survive. They will be controlled, manipulated, abused, hooked on drugs, threatened, and sometimes even tricked into believing this is the only life for them. This is the life that they choose, that they're safer with their exploiters than they otherwise would have been on their own. There are hundreds of thousands experiencing this right now as I speak to you right now. I want you to focus on just one because those numbers easily overwhelm and can make it seem as though me standing up here is a futile exercise. I want to assure you it is not a futile exercise that I am standing up in front of you right now. I want you to focus on one. If you do nothing else in the next few minutes, if you can't hear a word that I say for the horror of what I share with you, focus on one. I ask that you would pray for her. You don't know her name, but she is in terrible circumstances in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, Battambang, Cambodia, Chiang Mai or Bangkok, Thailand, in Port-au-Prince. She is experiencing horror. You don't know her name, but she's there. You can pray for her. Pray that there would be someone willing to walk with her into freedom and healing. Pray that she might be given the tools to overcome the trauma that she is experiencing in this life, but that her freedom here would be made complete with freedom through knowing the love, mercy, justice, and grace of Jesus. I ask that you would pray that the church would do the hard work of figuring out how to show up and how to lead the way in her care, because I am persuaded that this is first God's work before it is anyone else's, and that He invites the church, always His first choice of His agency, to be His agent in this incredible work. Pray that the church figure it out and do it. I know that I am here because you are a part of that answer. But that answer needs to grow and be embraced by more churches in more places and more people who are part of the church in more places by far than what is currently the case. The problem that I described to you, the scope of it is overwhelming. We need to do more than make a dent, ultimately. But right now, dent away we will. I ask you to pray for these things because, again, I believe that this is first God's work. Come with me to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. It is a central passage in all of Scripture, even though it is early on, relatively speaking, in your Bibles. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, we see Moses and the Israelites poised on the edge of the promised land, about to be led in by God Himself to conquer it. We get to hear Moses deliver what amounts to his last will and testament throughout Deuteronomy. We get to hear the marching orders for the Israelites as they're about to enter into the promised land. We can, if we give ourselves to it, stand with the Israelites in this time of preparation, sanctification, and consecration before they enter into the land. Those we stand beside, let's get to know them for just a second. They've walked in the wilderness for, some of them, just about 40 years. An entire generation, though, has died because they forgot the greatness of God's deliverance from Egypt through the Red Sea and complained about their experience after being delivered from slavery to the Egyptians. Those people are not standing with us. They have perished in the wilderness. It is a new generation that we are standing beside, ready to go into that land. There are only 3, as best I can tell and as best I understand it, for whom this is not the case. Moses, who is not about to enter in, and Joshua and Caleb. They are the only exceptions. Everyone else has died. They are the only ones from that generation that will enter in. Why did they die in the wilderness? Well, because they forgot that God alone is God. They forgot that it was God who delivered them through the Red Sea. This new generation, the first of the commandments of God, it is no coincidence, was to remember that God is God. Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 4 reads like this. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you are going over to possess it, so that you and your son and your grandson might fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. This really is Moses' last will and testament. O Israel, you should listen and be careful to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. And now here is a passage which is one of the most famous passages in Scripture. It is recited by Orthodox Jews to this day. It is ground zero for our theology, our understanding of who God is. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. They had forgotten this central and basic reality. And Moses is here to remind them. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Will you say that with me? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. It's the great Shema. God, in all of his goodness, delivered our forefathers, these are our forefathers, from slavery. And by extension, he delivered those we stand with from slavery as well, as we're about to enter into that promised land, even though, pay close attention, they had not been literally slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. They had not yet been born. Why did God do this? He did it out of love. So it's right that he should call us in the very next verse to love him. And you know this verse because you've heard it drip from Jesus' lips. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. It's not an arbitrary command from an arbitrary God who can do or say whatever he wants because he's God. No, this is something that God has done. He first loved them, just as he first loved us. He demonstrated that love with action. The call to love God is a call from the God who has brought us to the edge of the promised land, who has brought us through the Red Sea, and who has brought us out of slavery. It's a call from the God who has been serving and loving us every single step of the way throughout our lives, and frankly, even before that, arraying circumstances and situations such that, yes, even we might be reached. It's a call from the God who fed us and sheltered us and gave us love through other people, even when we were most disobedient. Now, the next part of the passage is, I don't know if it's intended as comedy, but it's very easy for me to read it as comedy, because something that Mark reflected on, God knows of us incredibly well, and that is that we are forgetful. We are wildly forgetful about these very basic things about God. And so this next few verses, which I'll let you read by yourself, basically is God saying, do whatever it takes to remember that. Practice remembering it. If you have to write it on the door frame of your house, do it. If you have to write it on your forehead, on your hands, whatever it takes, just remember. It's almost absurd the lengths to which God says we need to do things to try and remember that God is God and that he loves us. God delivers us from slavery and we forget. We choose, and we have to choose, to do the things that remind us of our deliverance if we're going to continue to walk in that deliverance. Now, near the end of this particular chapter, God continues to give the Israelites instructions as to how they should conduct themselves in the new land God was giving them. I'll let you read most of that. I want to focus on the last few verses. Again, remember, virtually everyone who had been alive in Egypt was now dead. Those who had experienced slavery firsthand, now dead. It is to the new generation born in the wilderness, most of whom were not literally enslaved in Egypt, that Moses commands the following, starting in verse 20. In the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? Tell him, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, But the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, the Lord sent signs and wonders, great and terrible, on Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household. He brought us out from there to bring us in and to give us the land he promised on oath to our ancestors. The Lord commanded us to obey all these decrees and to fear the Lord our God so that we might always prosper and be kept alive, as is the case today. And if we're careful to obey all this law before the Lord our God as he commanded us, that will be our righteousness. Isn't it interesting that though not literally slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, they were to understand that they were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and that God had delivered them with a mighty hand. Them. God led the Israelites out of slavery. Astoundingly, he led them through the Red Sea. There was no doubt that it was him. False gods, non-gods, don't stack water up on either side and allow you to pass through that while being chased to your potential death by Pharaoh and his army. There was no doubt that it was the one true God, the Lord our God, the Lord who is the one God. He wanted even this new generation, though, to understand that their touchstone identity was that of a redeemed and freed slave. Partly because if they remembered that, they'd become his agents in the world. God led them out and called a people his own so that the enslaved world would come to know that he is a delivering, saving God through his delivered people. I'll extend Mark's earlier thought. Those of you in Christ, God has freed you from sin. You were slaves to sin. Do you remember? Do you remember what that was like? Do you remember what it was like to be lost, alone, and without an advocate, or seemingly without an advocate? You may not have known that there was an advocate. There was. But to feel as though there wasn't? To understand the rightness of your condemnation, and at the same time to dread it and wish for anything else to be the case? Do you sing songs of deliverance? The horse and the rider he has thrown into the Red Sea, Miriam sings. What are your horses and riders? What was your Red Sea? Do you sing songs of thanksgiving that God took you from what you were to what you are, and promises you, assures you of what you will yet become? Don't you marvel that God would take you and lavish love on you when you are honest enough about the depth and ugliness of your sin? What is your story? What is your testimony? Be thankful. Be glad. Recite it in your heart as thanksgiving and worship. Share it with your spouse, your children, your brothers and sisters in Christ. Rejoice and remember, it is everything. It is everything that you distinctly and uniquely will ever have. It's everything that lasts. And then I invite you to do precisely what Jesus says, jumping ahead to the New Testament in Matthew 23:23, where he decries the uselessness of the religion of the Pharisees. He says this in 23:23 of Matthew, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. You practiced the latter. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former." Isn't it interesting that justice flows out of remembering your identity as a redeemed slave? All those weird commandments sometimes that we think of as weird commandments in the Old Testament that we're like, why did they say that? I don't really get that. Why is it that there's this talk about, after somebody harvests their field, that they're not supposed to go back and pick up all the bundles of wheat that's left over? Why is it that there are these commandments about, when you beat your olive trees, don't beat them clean, leave some of those olives on there? Who does he say to leave them for? The sojourner in your midst, the alien, the foreigner, the stranger, the oppressed, the poor, the widow, the orphan. And why? And it's interesting because God usually supplies the answer immediately after those kinds of commands in the Old Testament. It is because you were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. You remember what it was like, don't you? When no one would feed you. when 7 days a week you would work sun up till sundown, and that was the only hope and prospect for your children as well? You remember, don't you, what it was like to watch them eat and drink and have their fill, and to be denied that yourself, and to be prevented from picking up their scraps and their leftovers? Don't you be that kind of a person. Remember that you were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and let that memory of your former bondage and the greater magnitude of God's deliverance overwhelm you to where you provide for those who remain in bondage in all of its different forms. Will you attend today to the justice that your Lord calls you to? Will you remember the horror of your slavery and how it is swallowed up by the goodness of God's deliverance? I told you there were millions of slaves in the world today. What if you could help just one? Seriously, what if you could help just one? Would it be worth your time? Would it be worth your money? Would it be worth your investment? Would it be worth your commitment to do all you could to make sure that they were spared further horrors of slavery, abuse, and the soul-killing lies that people would tell them in word and deed? Would it be worth it? Would that be a worthy legacy? Would that be something that you want your time, your prayers, your money to speak of you? Rapha House's vision is for all children to be living in sustainable freedom in communities that are safe for them. We strive to do that by providing residential aftercare for survivors of slavery and sexual exploitation, through prevention programs in the form of kids clubs for kids and families who would otherwise be vulnerable to trafficking and sexual exploitation, and through providing awareness to all of this problem, which is straight from hell, and the solution that Rapha House provides to these problems that we believe is engineered and driven by God himself. I asked you to pray for one girl among the millions. Are you willing to be a part of the answer to that prayer? Rapha House has been figuring out how to put the church in a position to do something that actually creates change on the ground, real-world change for girls who have experienced the worst of the horrors that the world has to offer. We've put the church in a position to lead in her care. It's just a matter now of whether or not the church will show up. Will you help us to keep our workers working to these ends? Our workers are incredible people working in circumstances which are hard for us to imagine as we sit here. Will you help us hire more workers so that we don't have to turn girls away from our care because we don't have the staff? Will you, alongside of us, commit to keep them working for the long haul like the girls need? They need presence. They need long-term presence from a host of people. If their hopes, if their possibilities are going to be realized in the face of the trauma that they have faced. Will you make sure that the girl you prayed for gets the food, the shelter, the security, the medical care, the counseling, the social work, the legal representation, the vocational training and education that she needs to be able not merely to survive in the world, but to have a realistic hope at thriving? Are you willing to invest in her to those ends? Is this why God has blessed you? There are a host of ways to help. We left on your seats a brochure describing Rapha House's work for you to read through. I invite you to read through that. Please do. Along with the Safe House Partnership Commitment Card, perhaps the most immediate and critical way that people can help us for the long-term success of our work is for you to be a monthly Safe House partner. I'd be excited to talk with you about how to do that as well. In short, starting with a commitment of $40 per month, you can pick which Safe House you want to make sure keeps on providing hope and healing. Whether our Safe House in Battambang, Cambodia, or Siem Reap, Cambodia, or Chiang Mai, Thailand, or in Haiti. I invite you to please drive their work. Make sure that their work happens in one of those locations. And I've put out a special plea today that you would consider investing in our Thai house, actually, our Thailand house, because the Thailand economy, the economy of Thailand has grown at such a pace that we're having a hard time keeping up with what our workers need in that location and with how much staffing we need. And we have some really cool opportunities in Thailand that we can't step up to and meet without more partners for this work. Please give that special consideration. This particular opportunity is likely the biggest difference maker for making sure that our work gets done. Please consider joining us as a long-term difference maker that just stands up and rides this work out. There are other ways to partner too. I'd be happy to talk with you about those. The bottom line is that if this great work, this work that is so near to and even driven by the heart of God is to continue to happen, we need you. Our bottom line is that we help you combat child slavery and sexual exploitation with healing, hope, and freedom. If you invest in this work, that will happen. There are very few things that you will ever invest in your life which will be as worthy as that. I thank you for the opportunity to share this challenge with you today. Mark and I wanted to reserve a little bit of time for any questions and answers. Mark has a few for me, and I will be here to answer any questions that you have as well as we linger afterwards. And I just thank you for the chance to speak to you all.
Can you show Dave your appreciation for what he said? When you think of the numbers, 27 to 45 million children, people around the world, that's an incredible amount of people who are still in slavery. And you might hear Dave mention Cambodia, Thailand, and Haiti and think, well, that's not close by, but it happens in Volusia County. It happens right in our neighborhoods, right on our doorstep. I know it does. I've heard about it in our county. So we need to start working to put a stop to this as soon as possible. And Dave, I was going to throw a few questions at you, if that's okay. One question that people asked me, and I did not have the answer, was, what does Rapha House mean? What does the name Rapha mean?
Rapha is from the Hebrew for healing.
Is that terminology?
No. There we go. Okay, that's how technology works. Rapha
First in his class.
Rapha means healing, and really, it's our intention that healing happen in our midst. It's the heart of our work.
Now, you were just in Thailand. Could you explain to everybody a little bit about what your recent trip there, what you were doing on that recent trip?
I was there for our Thai organization's board meeting, and also just to continue to try and understand what our needs are at that location particularly, which, like I said, are pretty severe. We've got a lot of opportunity there, but again, because of the economy there, we have a lot of need too.
Now, Dave mentioned that Rapha House has safe houses and kids club, and if you could, just explain to everybody the difference between what a safe house is and the kids club for people.
Safe house is for girls who have been rescued out of human trafficking and sexual exploitation, who would otherwise have no safe place to go for them to heal, and that is what we do for survivors. The kids clubs, we go into communities that are among the poorest in the countries where we serve, where traffickers would know to prey on families and children in those places because no one takes notice of the poor in those places. And we instead move in and get to know those families and those children. We have, VBS-style games and Bible study and songs, crafts as well, sometimes even vocational training in those locations where we have a sponsorship program for kids who are a part of the Kids Club, where you can, actually know the name of your kid, know the face of your kid, pray for them, where their education is provided for, and we make sure that their families are not on the margins of poverty so much that they can't eat. We make sure that they are fed, and we build community. I mean, honestly, it's a pretty obvious model to those in the church, but we get to know their names. Their names matter. Their names matter so much that once those names are known, traffickers scatter. Traffickers are like cockroaches. You turn the light on and they scatter. They go to the the easier places. We make the easiest places for them the hardest places for them to do their work. And so they have to go, and while they do move on, they have to move on to places that are harder than the ones where we have gone and set up our kids clubs. That is a little bit different than our Safe House program, where we don't have girl sponsorships. We don't sponsor particular girls in the Safe House program because all those girls are under a security protocol of one level or another. Some of them have death threats on them, others don't have that anymore, but at the same time their identities are preserved in part so that they can be able to tell their story the way that they want to tell their story as they continue to grow. So we ask, instead of sponsoring a girl in a Safe House, that you actually just partner with a particular Safe House to make sure that work happens there.
And during first service, we talked about this. Let everybody know how many people are being ministered to through the safe houses and through the kids clubs.
Yeah, between the two, about 1,200 total. In residential aftercare, we've got somewhere between 120 and 150 girls, depending on what time of year it is and how many recent referrals that we've had and how many reintegrations that we've had. Our goal ultimately is to reintegrate the girls and to put them in a position to succeed once they've been reintegrated. We are not fully funded. Our capacity would be significantly higher than that, but that's what our capacity using our best practices allows us to do right now. The kids clubs, we have about 800 in about 800 in Phnom Penh, and about 150 to 200 in Battambang Bang, and then about another 120 in our new location in Mae Sot, Thailand, which is actually on a garbage dump in Thailand.
Tell us how we can get involved, how our church and members of our church can partner with Rapha House.
Well, we would love to have the congregation as just a partner on the team driving our work for the long term. That would be wonderful, through your missions giving as a congregation. But then, this opportunity that Mark has extended for us to speak, we don't always get. We don't always get an opportunity from up front to ask for individual partnership. What that suggests is that this congregation and its leadership, the elders and staff, have a lot of confidence in the generosity of these people to continue to give as they would every Sunday to the work of the church, but then also knowing that you are a generous congregation to consider as individuals with any other discretionary giving you have to partner with us as Safe House partners. And again, I think that's likely the chief need that we have. We are a long way from where we need to be as far as having the number of Safe House partners that we need to drive our work sustainably for the long haul. And that's where we ask that you would just join with us in that. And again, I put a special word in for your consideration of our Thailand house because it's easy to kind of forget them because they're so far away, but their needs and their opportunities are pretty tremendous right now. We actually run one of only 2 licensed child protection centers in all of Thailand, and the government wants us there. That's part of our model, is that we only go where there is a church that really wants our help because they recognize this as a problem, and where we have the resources, the spiritual resources of a church and Christians there who care, where they wouldn't know how to do this work or have the resources to do it. And then also, once that's in place, a government that is willing to welcome us in, because the one difference between the United States and the places that we go is while there is an imperfect safety net here in the United States through which unfortunately too many people still escape, there's really little to no safety net in any of the countries where we serve, and the governments where we serve are basically saying to us, please come be the safety net. Please help fill out the safety net here and help us figure out how to provide a safety net and how to give the girls that we are beginning to recognize have this as an issue, help us give them a chance.
For those who are ready to partner today, what should they do?
I would suggest that you go online to the raphahouse.org/safehouse and then walk through the selection process as to which Safe House you want to partner with. And just commit however much you can every month. We usually say a Safe House partnership starts with about $40 per month, but if it's less than that, we are just thankful to have your partnership, honestly. If it's more, we're thankful to have your partnership. And just please join with us. And I would say, just long haul, commit to us in making sure this work gets done. Our staff are incredible people. I'm humbled in the presence of our international staff. I think I explained in the first service that, we've got we've got about 190 staff system-wide between Thailand, Cambodia, and Haiti. Of that 190, only 5 of those are U.S. nationals. Everyone else are nationals of the countries where we serve. It is a national-driven model that we employ for a variety of reasons, but a lot of it has to do with long-term sustainability. We want to make sure that this is their work and that they know how to do it. And our international staff are brilliant people, oftentimes working in countries where, in the case of Cambodia and Thailand, where the population of Christians is about 1% of the population. They are working amidst adversity and misunderstanding, but they are working with the joy of the Lord, and they are, I would say, worthy of your investment in their work, absolutely.
Yeah, we're talking about not just freedom from human trafficking, but the freedom that Jesus can give. If 1% of the population is Christians, we need more people to be living for Christ in these areas too. Is there anything you want to share that we didn't cover just now?
Just thank you. I will be eager to talk with any of you who are so inclined afterwards, and just thank you for having us today. It's a real privilege for us.
Can you say thank you one more time to Dave Peter? In a moment or two, we'll do our invitation song, and of course, the invitation is an opportunity for anybody who needs Jesus Christ as Lord of their lives to make that decision. But I appreciate the message that Dave brought from Deuteronomy chapter 6, just reminding us that God is a God of deliverance, that God is the God who delivers us and saves us and rescues us. And what struck me during this service was that verse in Deuteronomy 6, verse 21, where the child asked the father, what do these laws mean? And the father says, we were slaves in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out.